Good evening, everyone. Good evening. I am Reverend Dr. Vanessa M. Brown, and I am your host / moderator for the evening. I'm happy to be here with you on Beyond the Gatekeepers. I welcome our Facebook Live audience. I also welcome our YouTube audience and all of those that are watching from here and there, all across the country, and as a matter of fact, all across the world. We are grateful for your support on this evening. And so we're going to go to part 2 of Womanist Ecclesiology, the Breast of God. And I want to begin to introduce our guests on tonight. Our first guest, and this is her second time with us. We had to bring her back in the person of Reverend Dr. Melva L. Sampson. She is the Assistant Professor of Preaching and Practical Theology at Wake Forest University School of Divinity, as well as the curator of Pink Robe Chronicles Digital Hush Harbor. Reverend Dr. Melva L. Sampson, please come and greet the people.
Greetings, greetings, greetings. It is so good to be back with you all on this afternoon. Our conversation was so refreshing, powerful. I'm just glad to be here. I am currently on sabbatical, but yes, I am Assistant Professor of Preaching and Practical Theology at Wake Forest University School of Divinity. I'm also the curator and founder of the Pink Robe Chronicles Digital Hush Harbor. Right now, I'm working on my first manuscript, which is tentatively called Going Live, Black Women Preaching in the Digital Age, where I am, I guess I would say I'm mining, if you will, the breasted God. So I'm just excited to be here, and I'm excited to be in conversation with all of you. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. So thank you so much for being back again with us. We're excited for this next conversation. Our next guest is coming to us This is her first time with us in the person of Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis. Reverend Dr. Liz is the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival, but I know there's more things that she's going to talk to us about. Please come and greet the people, Reverend Dr. Liz.
Good afternoon, good evening. It's so great to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation. Indeed, I'm the co-chair of the Poor People's Campaign, also the director of the Cairo Center for Religions, Rights, and Social Justice. I teach at Union Theological Seminary and mostly organize amongst the people, and it's awesome to be here.
Tell us a little bit about the Cairo Center, because I want the people to hear about that.
Awesome. So the Cairo Center is its mission is to raise up generations of religious and community leaders that are building a movement to address racism and poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and this distorted moral narrative, this false narrative of Christian nationalism. And our work is to both lift up and organize the Poor People's Campaign for today, but we also are engaged in a kind of battle for the Bible. What Jesus really says about poverty and oppression and racism, what we as people of faith are called to do. We run on Sunday evenings a freedom church of the poor, where poor people, low-wage workers, homeless folk who are organizing in our communities all across this country, all across the world, in fact, and coming forward, with God on our side, to raise a cry for justice. We're publishing a book. I have a book coming out soon, and the cover was just launched this week. It's called We Cry Justice, Reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign. And it kind of is a continuation of my first book, which is called Always With Us, What Jesus Really Said About the Poor. And so I bring greetings from all of those leaders, the real heroes and heroines, saints of the movement all across this country.
Awesome. And can you just do me a favor? When you get the opportunity, before I bring on the next guest, email me the sample of your book so that we can advertise it tonight as well.
Awesome. We'll do.
Right. We appreciate that. Our next guest is coming to us, and not a guest, it's Bishop Flunder. Always with us every week. She is the presiding prelate of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries and the senior pastor of City of Refuge United Church of Christ in Oakland, California. Bishop Flunder, will you come and greet the people and also lay a foundation for tonight's conversation?
So good evening, everyone. I'm just thrilled. These are folks that coming on here tonight that I would love to be on a cross-country bus trip. So we can strategize and plan and encourage one another and prepare for God's what's next for us. I have been in individual conversations with you and the work that you do for quite some time. I'm so glad that Reverend Dr. Liz tonight, and all of you all know Reverend Dr. Obery Hendricks, and we'll have an opportunity to talk with him in just a little while. But it is important for me to say that this is the connection. It's like a quilt, with quilt panels coming together and being sewn together, and having an opportunity to look at what a real womanist ecclesiology, what a real womanist theology can look like to change the world. I know for a fact, if we don't apply what we have been writing about, what we've been talking about, and we've been writing about it eloquently and talking about it eloquently. I spoke to Senator Warnock today, and we're bringing him on in a couple of weeks, by the way. But having the conversation about making the move from the pulpits and the locations of our church really into the world and into public policy and into seeing change happen, because we apply a theology that really informs what it is that God wants right now. And so, yes, we say put some breasts on it. We need a womanist ecclesiology. And one of the greatest breast-putting men that I know is also joining us here tonight, and he's going to have words. But I had the opportunity to write a little piece. I'm going to share it with the folks, Dr. Hendricks, before you say hello. But I had a chance to write in regard to his newest book, some of my thoughts and feelings. The name of the book, by the way, is Christians Against Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And what I said about it is the gospel has been hijacked. Dr. Obery Hendricks affirms the populations of people who have given their talents and skills and abilities to religion and church only to find themselves marginalized, disenfranchised, and vilified. He clearly states, I recommend this book as a roadmap to freedom, both for the prisoners and the practitioners of bad religion. Buy several copies and set captives free. We are in a nest of dangerous authors tonight who are writing and speaking into this atmosphere. I want to encourage you, as we will be encouraging others at the end of our broadcast, to pick up these books, because this is, as one of my friends wrote a script to a Broadway show, there is no map for where we are going, but we're not lost. Before the gospel was written down, the gospel was confirmed and affirmed by Jesus. There is no map. We are now writing the new epistles to be seen and read of humankind. And so it is my joy to also have Dr. Hendricks here. And he was stuck a minute with what happens in this technology, but he is here now. And I would like to also invite him to come on and to share with our sister friends and sister kin and our robust audience that is already listening to us tonight. God bless you, Dr. Hendricks.
Thank you, Bishop. One of my favorite people on earth, and I say that sincerely. And that's not just preacher. That's not just preacher talk. Glad to be here, and I've encountered all of these sisters. Liz Theoharis is a full-time freedom fighter on the front lines, and Liz, I've read your book on the poor, and it's clear you are a PhD New Testament scholar. I appreciate it very much. Dr. Melva, I knew Dr. Melva when you were an MDiv student, right? And now she's teaching me all kinds of stuff. I thank God. And Dr. Vanessa Brown. I think that was the same with you, huh? I knew you as an MDiv student. Did I have you in class?
Once.
Yes, I think I did. Exactly.
That's how I learned about the politics of Jesus.
Yeah, well, I appreciate being here. The important work you're doing and the important leadership that Bishop Flunder is providing. I'm glad to be here also because we know this is such a dangerous time. It's a dangerous time on all kinds of levels. And the murders, was it today or yesterday of the I think it was today of the of those 8 people and those Asian women. And we're in the cauldron of hate. That piece of trash who used to be president, he's opened the Pandora's box, and everything's coming out. So everyone's not only people of color, but women, freedom fighters, particularly trans people, LGBTQ people. We're in a warfare. So I wrote Christians Against Christianity as a tool, as one weapon. To add to the others out there to try to fight this horror that we're in. So I'm glad to be in this conversation with you as we talk about the way forward and how we fill the gaps.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hendricks. So glad that you're here tonight. And I just want to very quickly, because we have a lot of questions already coming in. I want to thank the Facebook Live audience for being here with us, the YouTube audience. The numbers are increasing as we continue to go on. And so my first foundational question, because people have asked that didn't have part 1, what is womanist ecclesiology? So that's just the first foundational question so that people will know exactly what we're talking about tonight. And so I am going to ask Reverend Dr. Melva Sampson, Bishop Flunder, Dr. Liz, Dr. Hendrick to all chime in on what that is.
I'm going to actually defer to Bishop Flunder and ask her to set the tone, because I'm going to, again, just bring in Dr. Irie's voice. But I appreciated Bishop Flunder's setting of the tone. And that is actually who influenced Dr. Irie as it relates to what womanist ecclesiology is. And then at some point, I'll come back in and give you the textbook definition.
Wow. All right, then. And I got to get me some glasses like that. That's some great big old glasses. I call those glasses I can see clearly now. I think that I believe that the definition it's almost like a river inside of me, because it kind of flows from one thing to another. But I believe that when we talk about a womanist ecclesiology and a womanist concept of our theology, in our ecclesial settings and our ecclesial realities, it has to do with moving away from a history of religion and religious teachings and religious dogma that is so male-centered with the stereotypes, because not all men fit into this male-centered concept, but with the stereotypes of domination and power over dynamics that require that there be a group of people that are diminished. And I say it when I teach my people, from the young people up, in order for me to be high, I have to find someone who is low, because high is not high by itself. It is high only in comparison to someone else. And that reality theologically is the reality that encourages chattel slavery, encourages the diminishment of women. It encourages LGBT people in 2 or 3 different realities. It encourages the diminishing of LGBT women or same gender loving women, because women are not supposed to be in a environment where they would, or a task that sounds like they're masculinated, and men are not supposed to be in an environment where they are determined feminized. And so there are certain realities of religion that suggest the masculine should be here and the feminine should be here. And when the church gets mad, oftentimes in my history, they get mad at men who are same gender loving, particularly if they have feminine anything of any kind, or women who try to be in roles that were historically given to men. So consequently, the Dolores Williams and the Katie Cannons of my life, and the concept of the round table principle by Letty Russell, in so many ways inform what I believe church should always have been. It should never have been top down. It should always have been a circle of people exchanging and sharing. And now I think about, and we talked about it before, the concept of people being so busy with power, which sort of goes back to the conversation about slavery, so busy with power till the mothers couldn't nurse their babies. They were so busy being special. Let me just put it that way. And they called on Black women to wet nurse their babies because they were too busy being who they were, too busy being powerful. And to some degree, that was a diminishment. But what I'm seeing right now is that if religion doesn't need anything else, it needs breasts. It really does need nurturing. The church needs nurturing. We need to be able to abdicate this huge need that we have for these power over dynamics so that our young leaders will stop aspiring, working, and politicizing and forcing and diminishing others in the process to be something great, both in institutions of theology, in the work in the churches. We are destroying and killing and diminishing one another just on who's on first. Who's on first? How many people you got? They see me and say, "How you doing, Doc?" They call me that now, "How you doing, Doc?" And I'll say, "Oh, I'm doing great." "How many people you got?" That's the next order of business. How horrible that is. That's the heart of what I mean when I say we need a womanist ecclesiology. I know what my senior theologians have said, but I say it this way because in the practicum, in the life that I lead, in the work of helping to raise up faith leaders and establish churches that are free from this kind of thing, I think we need to speak very practically to what it is that is happening among us. So it took me a minute because I told you it goes off in directions, but there's a lot that I can say about this because I feel it very deeply.
Mhm.
All right.
Ashe. That is exactly why I wanted you to go first. Because I am a womanist practical theologian. And so it was helpful for me to hear you talk about an example of a womanist ecclesiology. So when I think of what a womanist ecclesiology is, I think about hush harbors, and particularly I think about the beloved character, or the character in Beloved, offered to us by the great Toni Morrison, which is Baby Sucks Holy. And I know that many of us are familiar, but it can never get old, right? That scene, those words of this Black woman preaching out of a rock strewn from the earth, where her Black body is its own raised structure, its own pulpit, right? Where there is no phallic authority present, yet here she is preaching, standing flat-footed, engaging the community of God from a very womanist perspective, never having ever heard the word womanist, right? But living into what it means to be embodied, what Dr. Cannon would call what it is to have an embodied mediated ethic, reminding the people that in this place we are flesh, that it's important for you to love your flesh, to love it hard, because over yonder they don't love your flesh. They want to flay your flesh. They want to kill your flesh. Let your children see you dance. And not only let them see you dance. I don't know if some of us always catch, but let them see you dance in a counterclockwise movement. There is something about the counterintuitive movement. That's what it is, Bishop. That womanist ecclesiology is a counterintuitive movement to white supremacist patriarchy. That's it. There it is. We just coined one of the definitions right there. There it is, right? That it is a counterintuitive movement. It is going the opposite way, right? That we are doing opposite of. And so for those of us who then are saying, okay, well, what's womanist? Because sometimes I know I have a tendency to speak in ways where I'm making assumptions, where people are coming in on the conversation. Womanism for us then is not only this textbook identity, but womanism is, big word here, epistemology. But what epistemology means is to know. So to be womanist is to know from a deep level. Last week, we called it a prophetic knowing, and we cited the Reverend Dr. Ebony Marshall Terman in the ways in which she helps us understand Black women as radical subjects. We also cited the Reverend Dr. Stacey Floyd Thomas, who identifies radical subjectivity as an important tenet in womanism, right? And then, of course, we acknowledge Alice Walker, who gives to us the practice of womanism in her essay In Search of Our Mother's Gardens. And she asked this phenomenal question: how many in your family, how many of the women of your grandmothers had who desired to be artists but couldn't? Who had their artistry, who had their creativity, who had the justice that was inside of them beat out of them, stolen out of them. And so they lie there, right? In a way that they had to find themselves again. So to ask ourselves, or to actually be engaged in the practice of being in search of our mother's gardens. And then the end of that is she says, I searched for my mother's gardens and I believe that I found my own. So woman ecclesiology is about the process. It is about the practice, the way that we find ourselves again, that we find ourselves and that we find the flesh that we inhabit, and that we love it, and we love it hard. And how do we know we love it? Well, we love it when we start fighting for policy. We love it when we start shifting authority away from pulpits, especially when it's only male-centered. We love it when we love all of God's children across all of the spectrum. We love it when we say women, I mean all women, transgender included. We love it when we are concerned about Asian Americans and Asian Pacific Islanders who are being prosecuted and persecuted, when when we love it in the womanist ecclesiology and in the sense of the breasted God, we mean that we love all.
That's good.
Amen. Yes.
Reverend Dr. Harris.
Yes. Yes.
Theoharis.
Yeah, I mean, I loved where you were going, Dr. Melva, and where you were. That quote from Beloved. I share that all the time with the poor, the homeless, the low wage leaders, heroes, heroines of this movement, because we have to actually hear those words, you know, that here in safe spaces and movement spaces, we have to love each other, because out there before this pandemic hit, 700 poor people were dying from poverty every day. And what's happened is we've seen in this pandemic, you know, 500,000 people in the richest nation in the history of the world die. Most of them poor, most of them Black and brown and indigenous, most of them, you know, essential workers who are paid expendable wages. And so we have to have that message that we love everything about people. And, you know, I got to learn theology from Dr. Dolores Williams, and I got to sit around a table with her and hear about, you know, this theology, this womanist theology that came out of the wilderness, right? And we would talk about, and she would teach about it, and I would share experiences about homeless people, welfare recipients, low wage workers who are still very much in the wilderness. You know, but what's also in the wilderness, if we're going to talk about God's breasts, is manna. And nobody gets too little and nobody has too much. It's just like when I nurse my kids. It's just when my mom nursed me. It's just like my grandma nursed her, right? It's that, but there's not too, I mean, now if you have inadequate nutrition, then there isn't enough. But that's not what God intends. What God intends is that nobody can hoard and nobody can go without. And that happens in the wilderness before we're even in the promised land. And we see that happening all the time right now. We see folk on rent strikes. You know, we see Amazon workers in Bessemer, Alabama, who are unionizing. We see, you know, folks whose backs are against the wall, right? And they're pushing, and they're pushing, and they're pushing. And that's what our churches need. That's what our movement needs. That's what our broken world needs, is this ecclesiology, this being in the wilderness, but then still having enough, not having too much, not robbing Peter to pay Paul, but everybody having, you know, a right to live and a right to thrive, not just barely survive. And again, that comes out of the experience of powerful women, but poor women, and queer women, and Black women, and indigenous women, and who are in the wilderness right now, but who are still reshaping this promised land that we will get to, or that we will make, even if we can't get there.
I like that. That was good.
Yeah.
Dr. Obery Hendricks.
Yes. No, I'm very energized and inspired by the things that have been said, and you know, very much so. It's interesting. Just this very day, I teach a course at Columbia, the African American prophetic political tradition, and today we were looking at the role of some Black women in that tradition, and today we looked at Mary McLeod Bethune and Nanny Helen Burroughs, who's fierce. Lord, that sister's fierce. But one thing that, and we use Barbara Savitt's, her stellar text, "The Spirits Live Within Us," and what Barbara brought out in her portrayal and depiction and recollection, historical recollection of Mary McLeod Bethune, is that, in a sense, she transcended Christianity at the end. She became what she became was what Jesus was concerned about, and that was ethics. All right, and she outlined several ethics that she went to live by, and that raises a very important point, because if we're going to talk about the kind of justice that that recognizes the full humanity of women in all of its glory and all of its power and all of its rightfulness, we're going to have to transcend churchianity. It's just that simple. Because churchianity is not fully in tune with the gospel. And at one point before I move on, I want to raise this. It doesn't come out much, but the term rechem, that is in Hebrew translated as mercy, it means with a womb, literally with a womb. There's a lot there to unpack, but I just wanted to throw that out there. But you know, in the Hebrew Bible, the most important ethic, the foundational ethic that occurs 400 some odd times more than anything else is mishpat, justice, right? Justice. And you put that together with the saying, love your neighbor as yourself. What that means, and you put them two together, that's egalitarian justice, right? And so if egalitarian justice is the foundational ethic of the whole Bible, even though it was not applied to women in practice, because women, of course, were part of the man's household. The conceptual ethic still lives, and we who have grown out of that primitive time, if we are to be fully faithful to biblical ethics, to foundational Bible, then egalitarian justice has to apply to everyone on every level. Okay, political, economic, gender, I mean, all across the board. So that's basic. But then when you get to the gospel and you want to talk about being a Christian, Jesus made it very clear for us. He said, again, he echoed, you must love your neighbor as yourself. You must want for your neighbor the exact same thing that you want for yourself. He didn't give any kinds of exceptions or exclusions. Okay, so that applies to everyone. That applies to trans people, applies to every damn body. And Jesus made no exceptions at all. And we don't have the power to do that. But more than that, what he gave us as the mode of, and you'll have to excuse me, I'm about tired today, I've been working hard all day, but the mode of judgment, the primary mode of judgment is Matthew 25:31-46. That says nothing about who you love, who you live with, who you want to marry, what color you are, what your gender is. It's all about how you treat people. If you try to treat people with justice, with love and with justice. One more thing. In my book, well, I have a chapter where I have to smack John MacArthur down when he talked about, he wrote this stupid letter against social justice in the Bible. You know, you have mishpat justice. That's number one. It occurs more than any other concept. Then you have tzedakah, translated as righteousness, but it means treating people right. How do you treat people right? You treat them justly. And how do you do that? You do that in society. What do you have? Social justice. That is the primary ethic. And so when we talk about womanism, I'm not a theologian and I'm not a womanist, but I'm a biblical scholar. And I know the gospel itself foundationally supports the very claims of womanism. But more than that, if churchianity would just hew to what the gospel says, ideally, we wouldn't even need to talk about womanism, about that women need to be treated as full human beings. Women need to be totally counted in every way, and acknowledge the full wonderment of women, because there are ways that women exceed men in a whole bunch of stuff. We don't even see that. And so I'm looking at Nanny Burroughs in the early part of the 20th century, fighting for equality, and the same thing's happening 100 years later. So I'm getting carried away here. But the reality of it is that if we're going to be true to the church, true to the faith, we have to transcend the limitations of the church and of doctrine and again, to reclaim the gospel. And if we just reclaim, love your neighbor as yourself, and as you have not done it to the least of these, as you've done it to the least of these, you've done it to me, then we are on strong ground conceptually in every way.
Thank you so much. I see your comment, Reverend Dr. Melva. Number 7, God said to Moses, the daughters of Zelophehad are right, social justice. Amen. That is the truth. I want to go on. There's so many questions. Thank you, Dr. Hendricks, that we have. So here's my next question. When, and this is to all of you, when has been the first time that you met the breasted God? What has been your experience? And I will start with Reverend Dr. Liz.
So I was a part of a tent city, a homeless encampment in the poorest district in Pennsylvania, in North Philadelphia. And at that tent city, homeless folks, mostly moms with their kids, of all races, Latino, Black, white, Asian, indigenous, lived during one of Philadelphia's hottest summers. The shelters were closed, and moms and their babies were being told to go sleep in their cars under bridges. But people came forward and said, we're not going to, be alone in all of this. So we set up a tent city, and the first thing we built in that encampment was a living room that was also kind of doubled as a church. It's also a child care center, and had a couch. And, I met homeless vets that got dropped off from the VA. They had nowhere to go. They were dropped off at that tent city. I saw kids, 1-year-old, 18 months, learn how to walk, in the rubble but I saw God's abundance. I saw God's breasts. I saw God's love in the solidarity that homeless families showed with each other, and that the surrounding community and communities across the city and state showed, where folk would show up day after day, bringing donations, and we would go out with secondhand baby carriages and distribute the extra because everyone in the community needed it. And that's where I struggled, wrestled with Micah 6:8. What does God require of you? But to do justice and love kindness and walk humbly with your God, and questioned, along with my brothers and sisters that were living in this encampment with me, where is the justice in 250,000 people in Pennsylvania that same summer getting kicked off of Medicaid? Where's the kindness in the fact that, that folks are told to go, leave their kids alone at home and go find a job, any job. And where is God in a situation that allows little kids have to use a fire hydrant for a shower? But an answer came back, which was, here I am. Until the cities lie in ruin, those that are in power, add house to house, there are still, God's people, especially those powerful poor women, who are witness that another world is possible. And so, it was at that tent city that I received my call to the ministry, and got encouragement that we could build a movement of those that have been rejected but leading our way towards a revival, not of institutions, not of structures that impoverish and oppress, but of God's abundant life. And many of the people that were a part of that tent city are still fighting, leading Poor People's Campaign today.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Liz. Reverend Dr. Melva?
Yeah, so I actually write about this in the introduction of the book I'm working on now, but I don't use the words breasted God, but being in this conversation reminds me or helps me to see that that's exactly who I'm talking about. Just a few weeks ago, I had to funeralize one of my neighborhood's community mothers. I had to deliver the eulogy for one Miss Phyllis Cook, and I'm going to name her as being one of my first encounters with the breasted God. I am from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am from I'm from two neighborhoods in Pittsburgh. I'm both East Liberty, which is in the city, and Homestead, which is a borough just like once you cross the bridge, you're there. So it's not even a whole 60 seconds outside of Pittsburgh. And my mother was a single parent at some point, and she moonlit as a barmaid at this bar called the Black Bull Ben. And Miss Phyllis lived across the street from us. And my mother and everybody used to be at Miss Phyllis's house. Like, this was the house. It sat on a corner. The door was always swinging open. There was always a pot of this kind of macaroni and cheese. She called it glue. It was always a pot of glue on the stove. You could always eat as long as you washed your dish. And so my mother was working, and we were outside playing on some freshly new tarred pavement, and we were skating. And I cut my finger on a fender that was rusted on this old junk car, and it was bleeding really bad. And Miss Phyllis was really heavy breasted, and she stuttered when she talked fast and when she got excited. And I ran, they sent me into her, she stuttering and cussing. I mean, good cussing. She's cussing. Oh, what are you doing? Da, 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 da. And she was so excited, she couldn't find my mother's phone number. And she couldn't, and she just said, she grabbed me, she grabbed her daughter, who was my best friend, and she took me to the emergency room. And when we got to the emergency room, she was signing the papers. I didn't know what she was doing. And so the doctor comes out, and the doctor says, Doreen Cook. That's my best friend's name. And I'm just sitting there because that ain't me. And I'm just like, and so he said it 3 times. And on the 3rd time, she looked over me and she cussed me. She said, get your blum, 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 blum up. They calling you. And I thought, they're not calling me. And she said, they are calling you. And so, of course, what is the moral? How are you saying that you met the breasted God? Because Miss Phyllis cared for me. One of the structural frameworks that Dr. Irie talks about as being characteristic of womanist ecclesiology is not that only that is social justice oriented, but that it is trauma informed, organically trauma informed. And what that says to me is the womanist adage that it makes a way out of no way. It was in that moment that Miss Phyllis used her Medicaid card, right? Some folk would call it illegal. Some folk would call it problematic, like we call Rebecca's actions problematic in the Bible. But sometimes you got to do what needs to be done in order for you to get what you need to survive. It was a survival tactic, and it was in that moment that it always plays in my mind, even to today, because I said she took care of me. She put her stuff on the line. She could have lost her benefits. She could have lost her social service benefits because I was not her daughter. So when my mother came back and she found her, she said she tried to give Miss Phyllis some money to pay for, whatever happened. And the doctor and Miss Phyllis said, I don't want your money. She said, that's my child. That is my child. And I want you, when you're at work, I don't want you to be worried about what's happening here. I want you to know that I have her. And that's what I think about God. When I think about the breasted God, I think that the breasted God is saying that these are my children. And whatever needs to happen to ensure that they are okay, that's what I'm going to do. Bump your moral compass. I'm not concerned with your moral compass. Whatever needs to be done so that I make sure that these folk live and are okay, that's what's going to happen. And those are the Black women, the breasted God. Now, I met some breasted God who are men also, but right now I'm talking about the women. But my neighborhood is filled. The stories of my youth are filled with those type of folk who open their arms, and even after having let the master suck on their breasts all day at work, even after having fed, right, the master's children all day, they still had room. And I'm not glorifying that. I'm not glorifying suffering. But what I am saying is there is something about them that was organically trauma informed, that they knew what we needed even before we knew we needed it.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hendricks, you want to say something?
Yeah, you know, it's, oh man, this is just, it's amazing. Listen to this. You know, I grew up, I wasn't a thug, but I wasn't, but I was street growing up, put it that way. And so I grew up with all of the bad habits and bad definitions. But I was delivered from extreme homophobia. Well, not extreme homophobia. I wasn't extreme. I never did anything stupid, but I was homophobic. I was delivered from that in seminary. Thank God for that. That was my first step to becoming more human. But it wasn't until my daughter was graduating from high school, my oldest daughter, and I had heard a pastor, you all probably know his name, but he had preached this sermon on the woman at the well, and he called it "Looking for Love in All the Wrong Places." You know how these women are; they always looking for this, looking for that. And I was so angry that I just sat down to write a short story, for my daughter, that was, countering that kind of patriarchal dismissal of women's work, and to give it and make it a story of triumph as a gift. But it sort of took on a life of its own. And as I was writing that book about the well through the vision of African American culture, what her 5 ugly Negro husbands would have been like, it was such a traumatic experience, because I realized that as I imagined how these 5 different men treated her as chattel 5 different times and then dismissed her, I was talking about me and my buddy. And I cried so much writing this book. But in it, I envisioned women having their own community. And based on Proverbs 7, I think it was, as I recall, about Chokmah, wisdom, which is a feminine term in Hebrew. And that spoke to me of the woman side of God, as they called it in the book. And that is when I started really seeing God differently. And then when I realized that merciful God, Rechem, God who's Rechem, who's merciful, means that God has a womb, that opened my eyes, quite a bit. And I'm still learning experience. I mean, it's, someone at my age coming up as I did, we have all kinds of dirt to get rid of. But that really opened my eyes and started making me see things differently. And then, the womanists were smacking us brothers around just by the things they were writing and saying, and waking me up. So that really was very, very consciousness raising for me, and it's still consciousness raising. This conversation is still raising my consciousness. And I'm thankful for it.
Thank you, Dr. Hendricks. Bishop Flunder.
Oh, I'm enjoying myself so much. I just so I've decided to share something I've shared with Bishop-elect Vanessa, because she knows that I'm writing this book called My Mama's Kitchen. And the thing that I wanted to share was just a part of the introduction in terms of how my heart has embraced the concept of womanist ecclesiology. But what I said is that very early in my life, my family had a hard time getting me to eat. My refusal to eat, by the way, food served to me by my mother in particular, resulted in perpetual fussing at the table and tears and such, because sometimes the requirement for me to sit alone at the table until I finished my food was what happened when I wouldn't eat. And there were times when I went to sleep in my chair and they had to carry me to bed. And by the way, I don't fault my mother because she was a good cook. In fact, the people who knew my mother would testify that she was a good cook, but Mama was a working mother. She worked in banking and retail, and she was an exceptional cook when the time permitted, but she worked in the day. And my birth father drove a city bus at night. And so my brother and I, when we returned from school, before Mama got home, we were there with my father, and my father could not cook. Let's just be clear. I was, however, born in the era of the first color televisions. Some of you all were not born in that era, but the first color televisions and Swanson TV dinners. TV dinners, they came in aluminum partition tray, had to be heated in the oven. These marvels, TV and TV dinners, created new and exciting entertainment and a way to prepare quick meals to be consumed in front of the TV. The truth was, I loved TV, but I hated TV dinners. I hated TV chicken dinners, Salisbury steak dinners, turkey dressing dinners, peas, sweet potatoes, and I hated apple brown Betty. I can't even tell you how much. So it was beyond me how anybody could possibly enjoy a steady diet of TV dinners. But this is what I wanted to share with you about womanist ecclesiology for me. During the summer of 1961, my grandmother, Bessie Lee Hamilton, asked my mother for permission to take me to Fort Worth, Texas, where she was from, and where my family lived and where my mother was born. And we were going to visit my grandmother's sister, my auntie, Beulah May Berry, who was affectionately called Auntie, by the way. And my mom consented. We got on the Southern Pacific train. Our cabin had individual sleeping berths, but I tended to snuggle close to my grandmother's ample body while we were on the train. And shortly after we arrived, we put our bags down. We went immediately food shopping at the big open markets. And everything we purchased was fresh, chosen carefully, packed and wrapped. You all know, some of you all know something about this, in pink paper by the butcher, placed in a box by the fruit and vegetable grower at the farmer's market. The seasonings were in bins, and the matriarchs in my family used to pinch them and smell them. And for some reason, they put some down and others they would buy. But here's the part I really want to share. When we returned home, the cooking began, and my life began to transform. We had handmade sausages, links they call them. We had ham hocks and butter beans. We had collard greens. We had hot water cornbread. We had fresh apple pie, cream corn, pound cake, succotash. My all-time favorite, fried chicken. Okay, and I remember thinking, heaven must be like this. But it was not just the food. This is the part. This is where I learned womanist ecclesiology, even if I didn't know what to call it. It was the way it was prepared. It was the care with which the ingredients were chosen. It was the loving moments when they asked me, now come here, girl, taste this. How does that taste? Is that enough salt? Is that enough sugar? The way they included me. And then they even picked an apron for me that was too big, and they wrapped it around me twice and tied it up on me in the front. Some of you all know what I'm talking about. They included me in the fetch. Go out and get some ash potatoes. That's Irish potatoes, if y'all didn't know. Go out and get some ash potatoes from the box in the dark pantry. And then we sat down together and we turned thanks. That's what we called it. we turn thanks to God for the food, for the hands that prepared it, for those that labored. And we ask that the meal would be a blessing to our bodies and our bodies to God's service. And I pray like that now. And before I left, I stayed for a month, by the way. By the time I left, I couldn't wear any of the clothes that I brought to Texas. I couldn't wear any of the clothes. We had to get some new clothes. And I had started to jiggle in the front and in the back. And you can't jiggle, you know, when you're in the holiness church, there's no jiggling. They did not allow jiggling. So my grandmother and my great auntie got a corset and they cut it down and sewed it together and put it on me so that, God forbid, I should go to church and jiggle. But my appreciation for their care and their lovingness and their kindness and the prepared food and the holy hospitality of these Black women changed my whole life. Why am I saying this to you? Because I believe that the church needs to return. Hallelujah. You know, I get happy, Melva. You know how I do. We need to return and move away from, again, this choreographed stuff that we do that's designed to get people to come in and give a lot of money like we're going to a Broadway show. We need to return to the heart, to the essence, to the people who know how to smell spices and tell the difference on whether it's real or whether it's fake. And the people who go out of the way to include the young ones who are coming along, and the people who pay attention to the needs of those who are suffering and those who are poor and those who are disadvantaged and see it as holy work. We need to return to that. We need to return to a barter process where if I can cook greens and you can cook sweet potatoes, I bring you some greens and you bring me some sweet potatoes. There's so many ways we can apply that so that we're not in competition with one another. You can do hair and I can do nails. We ought to always be fabulous because of the ways in which we care for one another. And so I see that. I believe, and I've said it many times, Jesus did more of his work around food than he did around anything. He started his ministry at a wedding feast. He was always found at Mary and Martha's house, reclined on the floor and eating. He was always trying to feed the hungry. He was always, in fact, the last thing he did was walked among his disciples before he went to his ascension. And they didn't know it was him until he started eating. And somebody said, he eats like Jesus. That must be him. Why am I saying this to you? Because there's something to go back to. And I learned that in the company of Black women cooking, Black women caring, Black women teaching me, helping me to go out there and not jiggle so that I would not be thought of as a loose woman among the men and find myself in trouble. There's something about that I would like to touch and have touched again. Where is the nurture? Where is the nurture? You saw it in Beloved. Where is the nurture for you to nurture your own self, your own body, your own heart, your own parts that people told you you should be ashamed of? Where is the nurture for ourselves? And then how can we nurture others as they are coming along and not describe for them that power somehow suggests that you can tell everybody what to do? That somehow suggests power, that you can break people who won't obey you, that you can throw people away because they don't believe everything you believe like you believe it. When did the church become that? And why in God's name would we who have been oppressed take that on as something to aspire to? I have great memories, and I'm ready to see God celebrated again in some of the ways some of the most oppressed people in the world have celebrated God right in front of me. So yeah, that's what I hear. That's what I'm writing about, and that's what I feel.
This is good, and I'm so glad that the question was raised really by Dr. Melva.
Mhm.
But the reason why I'm saying I'm glad, because even as you all talk and share your stories, I see this as an anthology. I see this as a book. Somebody might have already did it before, but you all need to continue to tell your stories, and somebody needs to start writing so they can be put in an anthology with other women on womanist ecclesiology, and so that young people can read these stories and can understand, we're going to bring it back to the center of where we are, because we are going to be the ones to do it, but they also have stories to share as well. I just wanted to say that, which would bring me to this. Yes.
Yeah, I just want to just add something to my answer. And thank you. Forgive me for interrupting. But, you know, I am surrounded by women. I'm married to a Black woman who has taught me so much about so much what it means to be human, and help me understand, you know, all the vestiges of patriarchy. But I also have 2 daughters, 2 granddaughters, a great-granddaughter. The eldest daughter I raised alone. And so it helped me understand, see the grace of God. What really helped, to the extent at which I am human at all, really is informed by the women I've had around me. It began when I was raising this little 5-year-old girl by myself. So she was in puberty. And when men are forced to pay attention to the needs of women, particularly, it's something that helps us see the level of inhumanity that is implicated in us in society. I just wanted to add that I started becoming a more full human being when I had to raise that little girl every day by myself. And I thank God for it. And men should pay more attention to their daughters than women around us, because that will help humanize us to a much greater extent, because we need it. And I'm not putting brothers down, but, you know, just like, you know, and Liz will agree with this. I mean, white folks need to need to deal with Black people more. You know, straight people need to be around gay people more to see the humanity of one another. I just wanted to share that. Thank you very much.
No, thank you very much. It brings me to the next question. Dr. Rochelle Carr lifted up, which is, why does the Black church continue to ignore or dismiss womanist ecclesiology? And so I'll let any one of you start with that question, and any one of you can chime in right after.
So I think it's back to what Bishop Flunder just said. It's what we're calling the church that's probably misplaced, because I actually don't think the Black church, what I believe the person is then addressing is the Black church as an institution, but the Black church is a practice. Hear me, hear the distinction that I'm making. The Black church as a praxis cannot possibly ignore womanist anything. I mean, come on in here, Dr. Cheryl Townsend Chilks, because it is womanist at its core. The Hush Harbor is womanist, period. It is committed to the survival of an entire community, right? It is the place where one comes to consider what is serious. It is the place that unleashes one to be able to have the audacity to believe and then function as if they are human. So I think for me, in order to be able to answer that question, it is really the institution. And that's what I talked about last week, because that's really what we have a problem with, is when something becomes institutionalized, right? When something becomes colonized, when something takes on the values of its oppressor, it becomes problematic. And I just really wanted to make, I don't even know if I'm going to answer the question, because it is a necessary question to the person who asked it, who has asked the question, and I'm thankful for it. Yet at the same time, it's a little bit triggering. There is a way in which I know the question is important, but I hear, my mama saying, child, I don't have time to figure out why such and such ain't doing this, because I'm too busy having to figure out how we gonna get this done over here, right? Which doesn't mean that it doesn't need to be addressed. It just means that another adage that the women around the kitchen table is that, you know, life continues to show the institutional Black church better than it could ever tell. Right. As it says, you keep living. Like, this in and of itself is a womanist act. We are the womanist ecclesia, if you will. We are actually doing and being. And so maybe what it really is that the people that the institution, the parts of the institution that we're looking at, we need to shift our gaze, because City of Refuge is doing it, because Rivers is doing it. I could just come off the cuff right now and name institutional Black churches that are doing it, that are not in your mainstream. They're not on the Word Network. You know, they don't have big budgets to do their live stream media. They don't have, you know, their Facebook presence isn't hot. Their YouTube page is struggling. They don't have all that, but guess what they are doing? Out here being the breasted God, right? So I just want us to really, when we start to lump together these, you know, the institutional church and the Black, listen, the church is not, I know we say this and it sounds cliche, but my pastor in Atlanta, Reverend Dr. Mark Ogunwale Lomax, used to always say, when people start asking you, what is the church doing about this? You should really say, or where's the church on this? You should turn and say, where are you on that? Because the church is wherever you are. What are you doing on that? You at the steakhouse? Then that's where the church is tonight. We're at the steakhouse. And so I don't want to suggest that I'm not concerned, because that's not what I'm saying. I just, yeah, I guess my revelation is, my hope is not in an institution. And it doesn't mean that I devalue the institution. My hope is in the people who embody the institution. My hope is in the praxis. And I know that there are people who are out there doing this work. And you got some of them right here on this page. That doesn't discount what people have experienced. That doesn't discount how people have been shut out and shut down. It doesn't discount any of that. And I'm not even giving them a pass on that. The institution, for the ways in which they have dealt with people, I'm not giving that institution a pass. I guess I'm saying that at this point, I'm ready for construction, more than deconstruction, because I know what's wrong. We know what's wrong, but I'm ready to build this bus out so we get on this bus tour, so we can get this kitchen table built in this bus tour, so we can eat this fried chicken and we could go on around here and fix it. You understand what I'm saying? It's not that I don't want to talk. It's just that I'm almost tapped out, and I'm tapped out because it is that very thing of why the oppressed always, and I want to say it like I feel it, so I'm not even going to use correct English. Why come, right? Why come the oppressed always, right, has to figure out why the oppressor, right, has taken on the master's tools. Meanwhile, you know, some of the oppressed are over here just going on and building, and that's where I am. I'm building.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I actually have a short answer. I'm not giving, I'm Pentecostal. I'm not giving the short answers, but I will say what I have to say is as soon as the people who feign having power realize that this is good for all of us, that all of us will be better for what is a womanist ecclesiology. I consider Obery Hendricks a womanist theologian, even though he doesn't consider himself one. I consider Carlton Pearson a womanist theologian. I consider William Barber a womanist theologian, not just because they, say good things, but because we act in the world. Now, I know a whole lot of sister friends. We got that list that Dr. Melva talked about a minute ago. I know those sisters living and gone that have impacted my life, that are helping me from the balcony till yet. But my truth is, I am watching a large and active group of male-identified persons who are finding out, which is contrary to what their brethren often are saying to them, are finding out that all of us are helped if we move into some of the things that we've lifted up just now. Now, does it cost you something? Back to what Dr. Melva said. Yes. There are certain places that you cannot go without people whispering. There are certain things that you cannot do without people saying, man, I remember when he was a man, or I remember when she was a woman. I know how that works. I know what that exile feels like. But simultaneously, I also know the power that exists when we push against it. And so it is when you take the road less traveled. So it is when you're called to blaze a trail. So it is in prophetic work. So, I mean, I'm watching it happen in many, many places. The shifts are happening. Self-awareness that is not, it is not determined by somebody else's pain. I don't have to put anybody down in order for me to be great. When it really comes to me, and I really got that all of us can get there together, there's something real different that happens. So I believe it is going on. That's my, short Pentecostal answer to that. Hallelujah. Glory to God. Bless the name of God.
Bishop, that was not a short Pentecostal answer.
I thought I did.
No, we'll talk about that later, Mama.
Okay, all right.
Bishop Vanessa, can
yes.
you? Someone asked a question that I want to. If both Dr. Obery and Dr. Liz, as the biblical scholars in the virtual room.
Yes.
This person asked the question about what is the best translation?
Yes, I saw that.
What the question is, which Bible translation is most aligned with womanist ecclesiology?
Mm-hmm.
I have thoughts, but I would love to hear from our Bible scholars who I think will take issue with the translation period. But yeah, well, let's go.
Yeah.
My sister.
Oh, I see it. I've been thinking about it. I saw that in the chat as well. I mean, I love the Message. I love the Message translation because I think it brings the word into the reality of life. I also have people read that Poverty and Justice Bible, which is the English Standard Version, not because I think the translation is so great, but because it tries to highlight, the issues that impact, majority women, majority Black people, majority of people of color, majority of poor people. But I've been actually struggling on that one because I kind of think we got to read a lot of translations. We got to hear it in a lot of tongues, and then be able to read between the lines. But I'm curious to hear what Dr. Hendricks has and what others would say as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a thorny question because I don't find, and I'm sure Dr. Liz agrees, I don't find any translation, consistently, satisfactory. So I always try to, augment, with my own, hopefully well-grounded translation. I know, I'm trained to do that, and that's not everybody's forte. But what I am careful to stay away from, though, are paraphrases. Like the Amplified, the Living. Those are paraphrases. Those aren't translations. And just like somebody's paraphrasing what you said, any of us here said, they might convey what we mean, or they might not. Whatever it is, it's got to come through the sieve of their mind. So, I mean, that's something I would stay away from. But then on the other hand, what to look at is that the Bible, and let's talk about the New Testament in particular as Christians, it is not consistent at all. I mean, there's some of it that is, so oppressive, like in Colossians and Ephesians, for instance, that man is to woman as God is to man. And then you get into 1st, 2nd Timothy, that women shut up, don't say anything, and dress like you're going to a funeral all the time. So it's not only about the translation. It's also about knowing the context of the biblical writings. And lastly, I would say, if one reads something and it doesn't sound right or doesn't sound consistent, then take it a little further. And if you can't get it answered satisfactorily, I would suggest you leave it alone until you can, because it's so easy to misunderstand or to accurately convey oppressive sentiments that are ultimately oppressive without knowing it. So we have to be real careful. When we deal with the Bible, we have the power of life and death in our hands, literally. And so, man tells
your garbage.
Some of these pastors tell, I've seen it happen. Tell a woman to stay with an abusive husband. Well, that's power of life and death, because women have been killed because pastors have told them to go back. That's just a small example. So the answer then is there's no one translation. I use the Revised Standard and the New Revised Standard as much as I can, but it has to be informed by these other kinds of things I tried to just lift up. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Reverend Melva?
No, I'm appreciative of both responses. Well, I guess what came to me was, I'm not sure that what Dr. Obery said, any translation for me, it's all a translation of a translation of a translation. And because, I'm not a biblical scholar and I, didn't take Greek or Hebrew, not in the sense that those of you all who are trained have taken it. And so my thing would be to rely on a lens. I love what somebody said here in the chat. Sonia Williams said, the translation of the Holy Spirit works best for me, not always written, but certainly spoken.
Yeah.
And that's just what Dr. Hendricks just said, right? Like if it's not setting right with you, then you should probably let it go. I think it would be helpful to have some resources. I don't, around types of interpretation. So since we're talking about womanists, I would suggest additional sources or additional resources to help you understand what you've read. Or I'm thinking, of course, of the very popular Will Gaffney's Womanist Midrash.
Yes.
Which is a good tool. And I'm also going to say, I'm also going to say, Dr. Hendricks, though, the politics of Jesus alongside for me, Womanist Midrash is, as we talk about, the women in the Midrash in the Hebrew Bible, and then what it means to understand Jesus as a revolutionary in the new, those are all lenses, right? And for me, they're womanist, but they are also inherently Afrocentric and Afrofuturist, right? Are deeply steeped right down in there. And those are the way. And so what really needs to happen, if I could, just speak plainly, is we have to learn to read differently. Right. So not only do we have to learn to hear it, we have to give ourselves to read this text and not just read it for this spiritual edification, but to read it, right? To read it and hear it and read it and say, okay, I read that chapter. Now let me, to really understand what we're hearing. And many of us, at least on this call, we are familiar with the story of Howard Thurman's grandmother, who was unable to read, but would not allow him to read from certain parts of the text because of how they were problematic to her. That is a source. That is a way of doing. I mean, here we get into theology, the ways we use the Bible as a source to talk about God, to do theology, God talk, right? So it is the source. And so what I heard Sonia Williams say is that then experience is her source. That is the way that she translates. And I would just offer that in whatever translation you're using, that you understand it is just that, a translation. And what you really want are sources from trained folk who can help you understand what it is that you're reading in context.
But I like to, and I think all these points are important points. I want to make it clear that I wasn't saying, I'm not saying, I wouldn't tell anyone that any part of the scripture should be jettisoned necessarily. What I'm saying, first off, if one wants to be a Bible reader, then it's just not enough just to read the Bible. We all agree that you have to be an informed reader, and everything was written in a certain historical context with a certain intentionality, with a certain audience in mind. And in order to be really informed, one has to take time to read about that, because something can mean could have one meaning to us today and have a totally different meaning in another culture. But the other thing is, I think that we have to, because there's such diversity in the writings, we have to evolve a core of the gospel. I offer the core of love your neighbor as yourself in Matthew 25. As you have done to the least of these, you have done it to me. And we're judged by whether we love people, whether we try to help people, whether we try to comfort people. And if that's the core of the gospel, that gives us a starting point. Anything that on its face seems to contradict that, then we have to interrogate it and say, well, wait a minute. Now let me make sure what this is saying, because there are some things in the Bible, a lot of things in the Bible, in Old and New Testament, that do contradict that notion of love your neighbor as yourself. I mean, of justice, egalitarian justice. Women be quiet in the church. You can't be a pastor in the church. I mean, that violates the core of the gospel. And so, as a biblical scholar, I really have to say if we're serious, one has to go to some form of Bible study. One has to ask some questions and get some resources, but get the right resources, because there are some demonic resources out there, and we know it. Because if not, you could end up replicating the exact same thing, or being oppressed by the exact same thing that we're trying to free ourselves from.
Well, I don't mind being the heretic and go ahead and say that I think we need a whole new canon. Forgive me. My truth.
Agree.
If a group of people got together and pulled some writings together and decided that they would sew them up some kind of way and turn them into a book, it would seem to me that the writings that I'm reading now, I don't think that we give them the credit of being breathed by the Spirit for the times that will come after us. And I think we owe our future and the future of our young people, our daughters and sons of the flesh and spirit, a new canon that has current theological evolution connected to it. And I think we should call it that. If they can get together and make a table and pick some books, we should be able to get together, make a table, and pick some books. So we all have to be dead before it gets sanctified, because you got to be dead, because that's what gives it real credence. But if we do it now, because we're going to die in not too distant future. So if we do it now, it'll get all holified after we die, and the folks will have something that will really speak to the way in which understandings of God evolve with time and circumstances and culture and all of the things that we know are true when we read with the right hermeneutic. And when we look at the book with the right hermeneutic, why aren't we? And when I talk about it, often people say, oh, no, we can't do that. And I said, well, if we don't hurry up and do it, the writings that we read from now will become at least 50% obsolete. We've got to do something. And we are certainly capable of doing something. I think that we should do it. Now, that's my heretical statement of the day.
Well, this is book 2 then. Because book 1 was last week. This is book 2, right?
Exactly.
I just looked at Dasha St. Remy, who said, isn't this what we're doing, creating these new canons with these digital platforms?
Yes.
Yes, absolutely. Because there's a way in which it provides for us the freedom that the institution has not. Right, the freedom to speak, to say, to invite, to have this conversation, to be free enough to say, you know, listen, we just need a whole new canon, right? And also to say, but guess what? Because we need a new canon, I don't even really want to preach from that one today. I want to preach from the canon of, you know, Black women's literary, you know, arts, or I want to preach from the canon of Grandmaster Flash today. You know, it's like a juggle sometimes. It makes me wonder, right? I want to preach. I want to preach from the canon of Cardi and City Girls. You know, so there's a way in which, yes, that our canon evolves, but we need it because just like I imagine the councils, the ancient councils, who is not at the table when those canons are being decided upon, right? So the reason why these digital platforms become important are because most of the times the folk who have created these digital hush harpers are the folk who have been bad choice word, who have been removed from the table and the traditional canon. So absolutely, you know, I'm always giving sources. The other platform is what is her TTYL Theology Talks You Like or Not on YouTube. Phenomenal work, doing exactly what Bishop Flunder is saying, helping us to see a new canon, new ways. Kiana Sakile up there in your neck of the woods, Bishop Flunder, who's doing that work at GTU, who's helping us to stretch beyond church and acknowledge the role that the spiritual arts, not just Christian spiritual arts, but that what does it look like for us to go back and fetch our African or indigenous spiritual traditions, and how do we root them in a way that we're not scared of them? Like that's a part of the new canon also. But
there's something we have to keep in mind. This, I mean, you know, I've had this conversation with Bishop Flunder, and I'm for that. But when we talk about, I mean, our primary responsibility, as I see it, the church is my site of struggle. You know, I'm not involved with the church because I'm such a deeply churchy guy. You know, it is where the people are, and the people are united. So for me, the struggle is to serve the people and to free them from the oppressive definitions and demonic definitions, religious definitions and structures that hold them fast. And so if that is the case, the Bible is going to remain sacred to them. The Bible as it is will remain sacred. So when we talk about a new canon, I'm talking about canonizing the importance and the significance of resources to help us understand, understand the Bible, to help us understand that there's some things there that we cannot work with because it just goes against what we're about. There are other things that we should embrace more deeply, maybe, but I think we can't lose sight of the fact that the folk got the Bible, and mine, Kate, is not getting rid of the Bible. And you talk about a new canon, and you talk about being a heretic, Bishop Flunder. Lord have mercy. They might throw me out the family if I come up with something like talking like that. But you hear what I'm saying. I'm agreeing, but I want to add that to it.
I agree with you absolutely. Mm-hmm. And I imagine that Jesus had the same issue. You've heard it said of old, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. Right. But verily I say to you,
verily I say.
Heard it said of old. He did is right. What I'm talking about doing.
That's right. He was Coltrane. He was a John Coltrane of the scripture.
Yes, and he took on the law of Moses. Mm-hmm. And I would venture to say that's why they killed him. They didn't kill him for all of the reasons that a whole lot of folks, I think that they killed him. They killed him because he spoke truth to power.
Yes.
But they killed him because the people were going after him.
Right.
They killed him because he spoke back to the law of Moses.
And embrace the core of it.
Yes. And you can get dead.
Yeah.
You know, when you mess with people's power, there's no question about it. The Pharisees and the Sadducees had built power in interpreting the law in ways that made them powerful. Then here he comes along and he said things that flew into the face of their power. And they said that day, the whole world is going after him. That's when they started lining the cross up and nailing it together and getting it prepared. Because they knew then he got to go. Now this one, he got to go. And I believe with my whole heart, not for the generations that we are living in now, but for the ones that will come after us, because they will not follow this way. Can I just say it plainly and clearly?
They are not following this way.
And they will not follow it.
Yep.
I knew it. I got the heavenly revelation when I was watching the Black Lives Matter march, pushing back against poverty, pushing back against racism, pushing back against homophobia. And for the first time in my many marches life, the first time that I have seen such an abundance of white young people and Black young people and Asian young people and indigenous young people together, fighting together, walking the streets, taking the rubber bullets and the gas together and protecting one another together. And I said, these are the children, many of them are religious people, and they are not going to follow this way.
No.
You said it. There's a difference in churchianity and Christianity. They are not going to follow this way. We have to leave them something that is more powerful than trying to figure out what in the name of God was the Song of Solomon. How did it ever get in there? What in the name of God, in Jesus' holy name? How did Solomon ever get? Who preaches from that epistle? Who got a good word from it except to say this is a problem? Okay, let me tell you what's wrong. So you understand my heart, and I understand the danger, but I also understand truth, the inevitability.
Indeed.
Spirituality is what you do. It's not what you believe. It's what you do. And that, in that sense, they are the embodiment of its spirituality in this moment. Much more than a whole lot of Christians. I don't want to say most, but a whole lot, because they are out there trying to fight for the justice of God and not just sitting around moaning and shaking their heads.
Yeah, I watched last night the Soul of the Soul of a Nation, where a pastor of a church in Baltimore, not Heber Brown, but another pastor, and as I just want to be clear, it was not my brother Heber Brown who said this, said that the Black Lives Matter movement don't have no God.
Jesus.
To the point why we need a new, this canon. And I just thought, wow, why would you say that? Like, who told you that? Because what your real issue is because this movement didn't start in church, in the institution, in the wall. And then he goes on to say, because he had a revelation on the spot. He says, just as I said it to you, this revelation just came to me. He said, you know what the real issue here is? Jealousy. He said, I think that I'm jealous because they have been able to do what we should be doing.
Good for him. Good for him.
Somebody said to us, where is the scribe? Because Beyond the Gatekeepers has presented weeks of relevant canons.
In the cloud. It's in the cloud.
It's in the cloud. Praise God. Amen.
Oh, it's in the cloud.
It's in the cloud.
Hey, that's
for this conversation.
We can't deny that we said it because it's in the cloud.
That poses a question as a biblical scholar to you all. So if Sister Sadie says, all right, I hear what you're saying about this womanist ecclesiology, and Dr. Liz, maybe you can shed some light on this, especially. All right, well, Show me where Jesus said that. Show me chapter verse where you get this womanist ecclesiology from, which is real. I mean, because old folks they want to know. Show me in the Bible. So how would we answer that? Because I that's not a question I've grappled with yet, but it's one's come up in my mind tonight.
Dr. Liz, I'm letting you go. I do have a response, but please.
You should go, and I'll go right after you. I promise.
I mean, so I put it in the chat. Like I don't think it's number 7. I think it's 27. The daughters come forward. The daughters of Zelophehad come. We ain't talking about Jesus though. I know you asked about Jesus, but my grandmama read the Old Testament too.
Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm. So the daughters come forward. The first, I think chapter 27 verse 1 says, and they came forward and they stood at the entrance of the tent in front of Moses and Eleazar the priest and the entire congregation. And they said, why should we not get any land? Because my father had no sons and he died for his sin. Then Moses, it doesn't say in the text, but there's this brief break where Moses has to go deliberate with God. And the word comes back from God and says, the daughters are right. At least that's the translation. You the biblical scholar. You can tell me if that's the correct one. The text says the daughters are right in what they have said. And what did they basically say? They said, this shit ain't fair. This
in those exact words.
They said this is problematic and we want some land. And we don't care if our brothers or our uncles and them are worried about whether or not the land is going to be given away if we marry somebody. It's not fair that we should not get the land because our daddy didn't have no sons. Moses act like then. He may like, as they say in the South, Moses may like he going to adhere to God, but then we got to go all the way to Joshua 17 only to realize that the Negro never gave them their dang on land. And could that possibly be then why, right? We don't read it in the text, but could it possibly be why the Negro don't, one of the reasons why you don't get to go to the promised land is because God said the daughters are right. And you didn't do what I told you to do in the first place.
That was good. That was good.
Moses said, dang, if I just had given them the land.
As they say on family, good answer.
All right, Facebook, I know you're enjoying this.
Yeah. And
Liz,
so,
do you have anything with you?
yes.
I don't want to follow that. I mean, the daughters are right. That's it. That we just dropped the mic there. But go ahead, sorry.
How about the New Testament? Do you have any thoughts on that?
I mean, I everything from if you want to gain your life, you got to lose it, to I have come so that you may have life and have it abundantly. All of this is what we're talking about when it comes to womanist ecclesiology, right? Or they in spirit, we're together and we're caring for each other, and their numbers were growing, and nobody had too little and everybody had enough. I mean, it's about decentering this power. It's about coming together. Whether it's the feeding of the 5,000, we all know that story. That story isn't that they were able to eat off of 5 fish and 12 loaves. That was people brought their food and they shared it, and they weren't scared to share it. And that's what people do all the time. And that's what church needs to be, even when it isn't. And that's what the movement is. I mean, if we're going to talk about this question about, whether the movement for Black lives is coming out of the church. I mean, that it's in the streets that where the church is. I mean, ecclesia, Greek gathering. I mean, those were early poor people's organizations. Those were mutual aid societies. There were women taking care of women and taking care of kids and bearing each other and remembering each other. And we have to remember Jesus, if we're going to talk about Jesus, he's anointed by an unnamed woman who has oil, holy anointing oil, that nobody knows where it came from because it was worth a year's salary. And she, anoints him and And then what he says is what she has done
Yes.
won't be in remembrance of me, won't be in the remembrance of my father. It will be in remembrance of her, right? So every time we celebrate communion, we are celebrating this woman who saw that something else was possible, who saw that it didn't have to be this way, who saw and recognized and remembered and used, people wonder where she got that oil, right? Some folks think she probably was a sex worker because she might have stolen it, from somebody. That was worth a lot. And she did that. She did what she had to do. It goes back to the stories that so many of us experience, where we have to do what we have to do. And then this is a mitzvah. That's what he says. This is a good work. What she did will be told in remembrance of her. And do we remember her? No. We forgot the daughters again, right? We forgot the sisters again. Nothing is in remembrance of her. And but it's there. It's there glaring at us. It's there. And we could just keep on going. We could kind of read between all of these different stories and in between these lines. And and if we're going to talk about the cloud, right, the basileia, the kingdom, the empire,
yes,
is it of the skies? Is it in the cloud, or is it here, amongst us? And it's always both places. It's always right. That God's empire is of the skies, but it brings itself into this world, right? And that's what this is doing. That's what Bishop Flunder is about. That's what people here are all.
Exactly. No, I think.
Can I just add one other thing? The thing that touches me probably Bishop Timothy and his mama and his grandmama.
Eunice, yes.
Eunice and Lois.
Yes.
And the fact that they were acknowledged by Paul as having the gift before he did. This thing that we are anointing you to do was in your mother.
That's it.
And in your grandmother.
That's it.
And you have been sitting on yours, essentially.
Yeah.
Use their example and stir up the gift.
The gifts
that is in you.
That's
they are your matrilineal pastors.
Yes.
And this thing has passed to you through their teaching, and stir it up. Because you've been called to the things that you've been called to. So I resonate with that very powerfully. And I know that there are others that resonate, but it almost surprises me that it's in the text. So I talk to people often about this conversation about the breasts of Lois and Eunice, the spiritual nurture of Lois and Eunice created the reality for Timothy. And Paul knew that.
Yes. What I'd like to add also, and it's overlooked so often. We don't, but Jesus, the risen Christ, appeared to the women first. And that's, the significance of that, it just seems to not be taken into account half the time. That speaks of trust in their judgment, that they would understand what was going on. It also spoke to I expect a certain kind of courage that he expected to be exhibited, that they wouldn't run away from out. There's a ghost. I mean, there are all kinds of significances to that. The other thing is that Jesus treated women no differently than he treated men ever. He didn't talk, and he transgressed cultural lines sometimes to talk to women as equals. But when it comes to the resurrection, he didn't treat women as equals. Women were preeminent because he appeared to them first, and it wasn't any coincidence. There's significance in that. So I mean, all these things you all are saying, I mean, these are great. These are great. I see Dr. Melva writing these down. Yeah, I'm writing it down in my mind.
I've been in this journal. You all have been taking notes of everything you all said. To your point, Dr. Obery, you know, womanist ecclesiology, to all of the futurists, and particularly the Afrofuturists out there, is inherently futurist, using your example of to whom Jesus appears first.
Mm-hmm.
You know, when she gets to the tomb and it's empty, and then depending on which, you know, gospel you're reading, and then Jesus appears. The task then is for the women, hear us, to go produce a future.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Like that.
Yeah.
And has that not, this is like what Bishop has said in every story she has told tonight about the women in her lineage who sat before her and literally showed you, my God, today, how to produce a future. Now, I'm not talking about product here. I'm talking about the womanist tenet of how to make something out of nothing. Because in the tomb was nothing.
Yeah.
It was empty. They had to then go figure out how they were going to make something where now nothing exists. That's womanist ecclesiology. Is to literally turn ground, right? Is to literally build from the bottom up. And in that building, it's what that, you know, what we all know as grounded theory. What our folk would just say, we just doing the work, right? We're just doing the work, and that is I just the first task, you know, in that group of women was, now we gonna go produce this future, because when we go back and tell them, what we saw was nothing in the tomb, in the because in the institution represented by the tomb, it was empty. The future though is out here. It's womanist all through up in there.
And what about John 5, the woman at the well? She went out. She was the apostle to the Samaritans. It's like, yeah, let me go tell y'all what this man did. It's all there. But one other thing, the cultural background of antiquity, of all of biblical antiquity, is that it was all about the common good. There was no individualism. As I understand, that's inherent to womanism also, being concerned with community, focused on the community rather than on individualism. So yeah, I mean, thank you. I asked the question. I got all kinds of answers, and I'm coming up with some new ones myself.
Awesome.
Appreciate this.
Thank you so much. I want to say thank you to everybody tonight. There are still more questions, but we are already almost at 10. And we just really appreciate the audience for bearing with us on tonight and being here. We're excited about all of our guests tonight. Reverend Dr. Obery Hendricks, God bless you. Reverend Dr. Liz Theoharis, Reverend Dr. Melva L. Sampson, and of course, Bishop Flunder. We're so glad that you were here with us on tonight. We appreciate your presence. I know you all want to keep going, but we have to stop on tonight. And I want to say God bless you. And thank you so much. We have some announcements for you. We want you to make sure you're listening on the announcements. Bishop Flunder is going to come first with the announcement about giving, and then we'll go further. And I want to let you all know that I have on a Black Womanist shirt that says Dope Black Womanist. Shirt. God bless you. Come on, Bishop.
I like that, Dope Black Womanist. That works. God bless you. I want to encourage everyone who is participating with us. I know that we are going to emerge very soon from this pandemic and moving back into our lives. But I pray, God, that we will understand that this kind of connection is going to continue. And so I want to encourage you to support the broadcast by sending a donation via Cash App to $TFAM annual, or to PayPal, www.paypal.me/TFAMjustice. I want to encourage you because we hope to expand and broaden and in some ways improve what it is that we are doing in these conversations, so that before long, the entire world is aware of what God is doing through these incredible theological and eschatological and ecclesial leaders throughout our nation and world. God bless you. Donate, give something. If you can give a little bit, give a little bit. If you can give a lot, give a lot. But please share with us for this time. God bless you.
Thank you, Bishop. And while we're talking, we want to make sure that we talk about Dr. Liz Theoharis' book, We Cry Justice, Reading the Bible with the Poor People's Campaign. And the forward is by Bishop William J. Barber II. You can find that book. You can pre-order it on www.broadleafbooks.com. That's www.broadleafbooks.com. Thank you so much. Please support. And next we have our very own Bishop-elect Sonia E. Williams and her church, Rim Fellowship United Church of Christ. And she's saying, Welcome Home, a radically inspired movement, every Sunday at 12:30 p.m. You can go to www.rimatlanta.org for more information. You can also find Nubian Flunder, who is the owner and founder of the Healing Place Apothecary. The Healing Place Apothecary. Nubian is the daughter of our presiding bishop, and she has her own business. And you can go to her website at thehealingplaceapothecary.com. That's THPapothecary.com. Please do so. Again, I have this Black Dope Womanist shirt on. If you want to get the shirt or any other shirt, that's not the only collection. We have a YA Flunder collection as well. Please go to www.skymichelle.com. That's www.skymichelle.com. Sky Michelle's Teas and Things. If you want something customized, it can be. If you want to advertise with Beyond the Gatekeepers, you can do so. Just go to email us at beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com. That's beyondthegatekeepersshow@gmail.com for more information. Thank you for joining us. As Bishop Flunder said, if you'd like to give, please support our broadcast by sending in a donation. Go to $TFAM annual or PayPal at www.paypal.me/TFAM Justice. I want to thank everybody for joining us tonight. Facebook Live, YouTube audience. We love you. We appreciate you. God bless you. We'll see you next week.